I should always warn people that most sessions are recorded, so anything you say will be saved for posterity, which usually is a good thing. But anyway, this is our final shiur in our New England Rabbi series, or Hanukkah Torah Across New England, as we officially named it. And over the past 4 weeks, we've had the merit, the schus of hearing different rabbis from across New England, West Hartford, the Boston area. And finally, we're circling back. We're culminating in the one we've all been waiting for Stanford
I was
representation
waiting
from.
for years.
Oh yes, mine was slipped in there somewhere as well. But we circled back to Stanford for Rabbi Cohen for our final session. The shiur actually was renamed. We have a very special shiur tonight. It's titled "A Kiss from Above: The Miracle of the Light." Now, for that off chance that there is somebody who is not from Stanford that's on there, because technically this is a offer to people throughout New England from the various shuls that participated. I'm going to give a little introduction to Rabbi Cohen. I hope I do it justice. But just a few highlights from Rabbi Cohen. Rabbi Cohen has had a illustrious career serving in different pulpits throughout the United States, West Orange, Denver, even in West Hartford, so not his first place in New England. And he serves as a national officer of the Rabbinical Council of America. He's a member of the National Council of AIPAC, the board of the ADL, and the Beis Din of America. And in addition to that, he also has authored a few books as well. Mining for Gold, Essays on Torah in the Modern World, and What Will They Say About You When You're Gone? 7 Principles for Reverse Engineering Your Life. I'm sure there's many other wonderful things I could say, but only Mixas Shevach I'm allowed to say. So we'll go there. That way I don't take the entire session from you. But without any further ado, I'll hand over the mic to Rabbi Cohen.
Thank you, Rabbi Kurtz, for the introduction, and thank you for your partnership. You've only been here since July, but stepped in really well with Marissa. We really appreciate your creativity, your organization, your menschlichkeit, and helping organize this program. So yasher koach to you, and God willing, we'll continue to learn and grow together. So thank you very much for the warm introduction. I first want to begin actually by acknowledging and dedicating tonight's shiur to a couple of few people. There are a number of yortzites this evening. One is Gloria Green's father, whose yortzeit is tonight, Nasa Nutta ben Shlomo. We should have him in mind. And also Len Mark's father, whose yortzeit is tonight, Yitzchak ben Meir Zev. And Len's father actually was very close with my grandfather, but when I was thinking about both your father, Gloria, and Len's father, we don't need to know more than if one produced a Len Mark and the other produced a Gloria Green, then they must have been really special people. So their memory should be for a blessing. And I also want to dedicate the Torah tonight to Diane's parents, Rivka Bas Nachum and Yitzchak ben Ari Lev, and my mother, blessed memory, Sarah Malka Bas Aaron Abraham Halevi. And also want to thank my daughter Elisheva. She is a much better source sheet put together than me. So I have the sources, I'm giving the shiur, but when I turn for some organization on a sheet of paper, I just appreciate what she did. Tonight, also, by way of introduction, a lot of the ideas I'm going to share tonight are from a really important Torah personality from the 20th century. His name was Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of his name before. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz was born in 1902, and he died in 1979. His really mark in Torah was that he was the Rosh Yeshiva and a teacher at the Mir Yeshiva for close to 40 years. He began in Poland at the Mir Yeshiva, and then from there he headed the yeshiva when they escaped the Holocaust, and the yeshiva was there in Shanghai for about 5.5 years before coming to America. And there are many stories about him. He was the grandson of a great sage, the Alter of Navardik. And he himself actually, just as a reflection of who he was, when he came to Shanghai, when he went to Poland, he was given a visa right away for him and his family to go to America within months of his arrival in Shanghai. And he refused to go. He said, I'm not going to leave Shanghai until all of the students get the ability to immigrate to America. And basically, he stayed in Shanghai for 5.5 years. Also, another story about him, and this pertains, I think, to tonight, is that during the Six-Day War, his yeshiva was really in the exposed to Jordanian firefighting, and he asked somebody who was going to America to take what are called now his Sichot Musar. Sichot Musar were his discourses, and he told the person, he said, don't put it in your suitcase. I want you to carry these manuscripts with you to America because this represents my life work. And what we're sharing tonight is one of those essays from the Sichot Musar that he wrote in his illustrious career, and he really felt was a reflection of his life work. So that's kind of by way of introduction to the shir this evening. I've chosen not to put the sources on the sheet. The sources are in your chat. So if you go to your chat, certainly I'm going to be working through these sources, but I like to see people as opposed to having the screen in front of you. First, I want to make sure that everybody can kind of open the chat if you like. You certainly can listen to what I'm saying. Does everyone see? You can nod your head if you have access to the sources. Okay. The other thing, by the way, I just need to mention, when I was doing my research on Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, his wedding anniversary was actually on the 3rd of Tevet, which is in a few days. And the 3rd of Tevet was also the anniversary of his passing. So we're actually right near a very important date in his life. And hopefully the learning should also serve as an elevation for his neshama. So the question I'm going to pose this evening, the title of the class or presentation is called A Kiss from Above, the Miracle of the Light. And it stems, if you look at the source really that pertains to Hanukkah, which is from the Gemara in Shabbos on page 21b. And there is no tractate actually called the Tractate of Hanukkah. If you look for it, you won't find it. The Tractate of Hanukkah is found, or the section of the laws of Hanukkah are found in the Tractate of Shabbat. Who can just tell me why is Hanukkah found in the Tractate of Shabbat? Somebody can unmute if you like.
A candle lighting?
Yeah, it's actually in the 2nd chapter of the Tractate of Shabbat, which we're familiar with actually from Friday night davening, where it says, Bameh madlikin, uvama eid madlikin. What do we light with, and what do we not light with? And the Gemara there describes the different kind of wicks, which we'll talk about later, that are kosher for Hanukkah candles, but you can't use them on Shabbat. And then the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says, my Hanukkah. Now you would translate that simply as my Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? And you think you're going to get a history lesson. But Rashi actually there says the question of my Hanukkah is a little bit deeper. If you look at source number 2, the question is, my Hanukkah, al eze nes kabuha. On what basis, on what miracle did we or did the rabbis decide to establish this holiday? What is the main miracle of the holiday of Hanukkah? So by a show of Zoom hands here, who thinks the main miracle is the miracle of the oil? Raise your hand. Rabbi Kurtz, David Kweskin. Everybody else is thinking about it. They're hedging their bets. Obviously, everybody else thinks the miracle of the battle, potentially. Thank you, Jake, for chiming in there. I appreciate that. So let's look what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, what is Hanukkah? What is the source? The Gemara writes, the sages taught in Megillat Tanit. On the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. And we don't eulogize on them, and we don't fast on them. Why are these holidays? So the Gemara says, when the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Chashmonaim came, they emerged victorious over them. Very little is given towards the battle, right? If you actually want to get a description of the battle, you look in what prayer? Where do you read about it? In the Al-Hanisim. The Al-Hanisim talks about the few and the many and so on and so forth. But here, the main focus is they searched and they found one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil there to light for one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit it for one day, but it lasted for 8 days. Then the Gemara concludes, L'shana acheret, the next year, Kava'um vasam yamim tovim. They made this a holiday filled with Hallel and Hodah, prayer and thanksgiving. So the Gemara is telling us here that the purpose or the establishment of the holiday was not because of the miracle of the battle, but rather because of the miracle of the oil. Now, from your perspective, what rationally do you think would be a real reason to celebrate a holiday? Is it because, if you think about it in a minute, imagine a group of Kollel students going against the mighty Greek army and say, we're going to win. Let's get our pens, let's get our paper, and let's fight. I mean, it'd be pretty miraculous for a group of Torah scholars to fight back. And yet, the Gemara seems to say that that's not the reason why we established the holiday, but we established the holiday because of the oil. And the question is why? Why is the oil so significant that the Gemara says that this is the reason why we established the holiday? To make the question even stronger, and then I'd love to hear what people have to say, in the temple itself, there were many miracles that took place. This is actually not in your source sheet, but if you look in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, we see that there were numerous miracles that took place on a daily basis in the Beit HaMikdash, which were, what are some of the miracles?
There was no smell of the carbonate.
Yeah, no smell of the korbanot. It was not a foul stench. One of the great miracles was that the bread stayed fresh. There were no preservatives from week to week. It was constantly fresh the whole time. And it said, by the way, was there a roof over the altar? What happened if it rained and the fire was burning?
Never went out.
It never went out. I mean, the truth is, that's pretty miraculous. There were miracles that were taking place on a consistent and daily basis in the Beit HaMikdash. So the question is, again, why was this miracle of the oil so significant when miracles occurred on a daily basis? And the third question is that, in fact, and this is something actually that's alluded to in your fourth source on the sheets, if you'd like to follow along. I'm now moving to Hanukkah 501. So hold on tight. This is a little bit esoteric, but I know this is a very tight group. If you've made it through 5 New England rabbis classes, then you deserve to go into the realm of purity and impurity. Okay, that was my quick intro. So there is a concept, and the concept is called, and I'll explain it in a minute, it's called Tuma Hutra B'tzibor. That if everything is tameh, what was the reason, by the way? Was there light and oil that they could have used in the temple? Answer is yes. The problem was that the oil that was there was tameh, it was impure. They only had 1 jug of oil that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. But the halacha is, Jewish law teaches us that when everything is tameh, when the entire temple is desecrated, hutra b'tzibur, you don't need pure olive oil because everything is in a state of tuma, impurity. So the Pnei Yehoshua asks the question, again, it's in your source sheet if you want to follow. He says, what's the need for the miracle in the first place? Why did God need to create a miracle at all? Let them use impure oil. Why was it necessary to use pure oil and to have the oil last for 8 days when in fact they could have used impure oil as well? And the fourth question, let's just review for a minute. Question number 1, why is the holiday on the basis of the miracle of the oil? It seems not that significant when it comes to actually the major victory of the military victory. Number 2, there were miracles taking place all the time. Why is this miracle so special? Number 3 is they didn't even need a miracle. They could have lit the menorah with impure oil. And the fourth one is, why when it comes to Al Hanisim, did they not even mention the miracle of the oil? If the miracle of the oil is so significant, there its focus is totally on the battle. Why is there no mention of the miracle of the oil there? So all these questions really relate to a fundamental question, is why do we have a holiday for a miracle of the oil when there are so many reasons to say the holiday should be based on a miracle of the military victory and the miracle of the oil wasn't even necessary? So I'd like to hear what people have to say for a few minutes so I can take a drink of my tea. David Gordon, go ahead.
So on the first question, I would say that one could question whether the battle was a miracle. I mean, you had people fighting people. They could have been very skilled. They could have been very clever. Whatever. It's not. You could always argue: was it God intervening or not? God not intervening? But with the oil, if something burns is supposed to burn for a day and it lasts for 8 days, then there's no question. No one's intervening but God. So that's why that's.
So it's interesting, just to take what you said, which is an important point that's made, is that the oil reflects and lets us know that the miracle of the battle was also miraculous. In other words, if you only had the miracle of the battle, you might say, yeah, there were great tacticians and who knows what it was, and you might have ascribed it to something which is purely a military victory, a great victory, but not necessarily a divine victory. But the miracle of the oil reflects not only on the oil, but actually, according to some, the miracle of the oil is there to let us know that the military victory was also of a divine nature as well. So thank you. Meryl, do you agree with your husband or not?
Whatever he says is just
whatever he says. Good answer. Okay. Who else wants to tell me why they think the miracle of the oil is worthy of holiday? Rabbi Kurtz, you're raising your hand.
I won't steal the Pnei Yeshua, don't worry. I'll
Okay.
do that for you. But I think historically, the war is a little bit embarrassing for the Jewish people because this is really in the midst of, I don't know if you could call it a civil war, but the Jewish people were fighting among themselves at the time as well. So I would imagine we wouldn't really want to emphasize the war part because there's a lot of infighting going on too.
That's a very good point. No, that's a great point. It kind of is a little bit right. It didn't have to be that way, but there was this civil war going on. That's true. Very good point. Does Marissa agree with you, or she's not there? Just kidding. Okay, that's fine.
She wouldn't give the same answer as Meryl, though.
Okay, fine. All right. So we kind of set up a paradigm here about what's so significant about a miracle of the oil. So I'd like to share with you Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz's approach that I think opens up an important portal of understanding, and that's source number 5. In order to answer this question, he goes to another text that we just read about in last week's Torah portion, which is the sale of Yosef. It's something which is very cryptic. So if you look in your source sheet, the Torah makes the following statement. It's chapter 37, verse 25. It says that after they sold their brother, Vayeshvu le'achol lechem, they sat down to a meal, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilad. Their camels had on it gum, balm, and I don't know how to pronounce this, valot, ladanum. I never had that before. Different kind of spices. They were taken down to Egypt. Now, Rashi asks a question on this. What's the question you might ask, unless you looked at Rashi? Like, the Torah is telling us what kind of spices were in the caravan. What's the obvious question? Why is that relevant? Like, what's the goal here of telling us about these spices? So look at what Rashi explains here. Rashi says, it's to tell you how great is the reward of the righteous. It's not usual for Arabs to carry anything but naphtha and itran, which are evil smelling, or foul smelling. But for this one, Yosef, it was specially arranged that they should be carrying fragrant spices so that he should not suffer from a bad odor. So again, the answer that Rashi gives seems to be a little bit odd. What's odd about this answer? Here, Yosef is literally in the pits. I mean, literally. His life is a mess. He is being sold down to Egypt, and he is really thinking about what his destiny is going to be. He's in a state where the last thing on his mind are the spices that are in the caravan. And yet Rashi makes a point, and Rashi says that God made sure that when Yosef was going down to Egypt, when things looked so dark and difficult for him, God gave him spices that smelled nice.
To lift his spirit.
Lift his spirit. Okay. Yeah.
That's the way we smell spices after during Havdalah, when the Shabbat Hamalkah is going away.
Right, now it's interesting though, lift his spirits, but doesn't it seem almost trivial? Here the man is going down to be sold and going to Egypt, leaving his family. Not sure he's going to see us again. And we say, oh, by the way, smell some nice spices. At least you'll have some nice cologne on the way down to Egypt. It seems trivial. I mean, after Shabbat, it's nice that we smell, not nice, it's mystical. But here it's like, you're going into jail, but might as well take my, I don't know, Drakkar Noir.
Yitum HaTorah in the Beis Hamikdash, they were very important.
That's true. That's true. But it just seems like, again, a very big stretch to say that that was what was going to give him the chama, give him comfort on the way down. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz takes this idea and really opens up an important idea that we'll see in a few moments is explained in numerous ways throughout history as he describes it, and something that will help us understand about why the miracle of the oil was so significant. So I'm going to read this to you kind of loosely in source 7. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz wonders, and he says, I don't understand. When Yosef was going down to Egypt, he was the prized son of his father Yaakov. He had learned in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, and now he's going to be a servant in Egypt, a place filled with impurity, a land where his family had tried to leave. And he was going into a place of great choshech, of darkness. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says, this is what I said before, Ma hevdel yesh li Yosef. What's the difference for Yosef? If he smelled on the caravan tar, or if he smelled something nice on the caravan? How would that appease his spirit? So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says this in order to explain what the message is for Yosef, and in turn the message that God tries to give people in moments of challenge. He said Yosef was in a time of darkness where his entire world looked like it was being destroyed in front of him. He could have come to a place of despair and felt that God had abandoned him. Here he was, the prized son of Yaakov. He had everything going for him. And now, literally, as he had his brothers wanted to kill him, he's thrown into the pit. He's going down. If you would have asked him, is God with you? Does God still care about you? He had every reason to think in that moment that God had abandoned him. Yet in this moment, God sends him in the way Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says so beautifully, is a kiss from above. God gives him a small sign. And the small sign is something which was truly, obviously, miraculous. It was small, because normally they don't have these sort of spices that are there. To tell him that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God, Molicho Yad Biyad, that God was holding his hand as he went down to Egypt, and that even though he was going down into Egypt, God was never going to let him go. And it was that small gesture from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God, that gave Yosef the reassurance that even though he's going down into Egypt, Hashem is still going to be with him. And Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says so beautifully, if you look at source number 8, this is really what Yaakov is told by God. Look in source number 8, it's from Bereshit chapter 46, verse 4. This is actually an idea that is explained by the Kli Yakar, who was another commentator, where God says to Yaakov, he says to him, Anochi ereid imcha Mitzrayma. I will go down with you to Egypt. Vanochi alcha gamalo. And I will bring you back. And Yosef's hand shall close your eyes. He's saying that you're going to die down in Egypt. But here, look carefully at the text for a moment. God says, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will bring you up. Now, there's a little bit of a nuance, but is there anything odd about this verse? This is God's promise to Yaakov as he's going down into Egypt. According to the text, who's going down to Egypt first, God or the Jewish people? The text seems to indicate, Anochi ereid, I will go down, imcha, with you. God goes down to Egypt, and then the Jewish people go next. But then when leaving Egypt, God says, Anochi alcha, I will take you out first, gam alo, and then I will go out. The Kli Yakar asks, why when going down to Egypt is God the one to go first? But when leaving Egypt, the Jewish people are the ones to go first. If you look at source number 9, remember this Devar Torah when I was in Israel in 1986. This was in my gap year in Or Yerushalayim. I heard this Devar Torah and it never left me. And he gives the following example. He says, imagine you're with a friend who you're going to go into a swimming pool, and your friend really doesn't know how to swim. And you say to him, let's go jump in the pool. Not a good scene. And your friend says to you, look, I'll go in the pool, but only if you go in the pool first. You check the water out. So your friend jumps in the pool, and then, what was that? I don't know who's who. I jump in the pool, and then the friend comes in. And then my friend says to me, or the guy who doesn't know, so he says, I'm ready to go out. And he says, look, don't leave. I don't want to be in this pool all by myself. I'll go out. You go out first, and then I'll go out. And the Kli Yakar says so beautifully that God ensures that the Jewish people, Sheyeh Yisrael begalut rega acha b'lo shechina, that God ensures that there's not a single moment that the Jewish people are alone in the diaspora. And God is communicating to the Jewish people here, and he's communicating to Yaakov Avinu, that despite the difficulty they are going to experience, God is never going to abandon them. And it's that message Rav Chaim Shmulevitz points out that really becomes the basis, we'll see in a few moments, for numerous examples where God expresses to individuals gestures of kindness that are not something which is actually needed, but it's an act of kindness that God does for somebody or for the Jewish people that is a specific way of demonstrating to them, I know you don't need this, but I love you, and I'm going to do something extra for you as a sign of his special care for them. And there are numerous examples Rav Chaim Shmulevitz quotes. If you look at source number 10 inside, source number 10 is the case where David HaMelech, if you read, David HaMelech slays Goliath. And let's read the text carefully. It says, David put his hand into the bag. He took out a stone and he slung it. It struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. Now let's try a test here with my phone, okay? Pretend like this is Goliath and pretend like this is the stone. I'm doing an experiment, watch carefully. Now, if the stone goes into Goliath's head, which way does Goliath go? Backwards. But what happened with Goliath? Everybody's turning on their screen so they can see my magic tricks. What actually happened though? When the stone hit Goliath, what had happened to him? He doesn't fall this way, he falls this way. Now you might think, well, that's a minor point, but that's not a minor point. Look what Rashi says over here, because logic would say that if a stone goes like this, you should fall backwards. But let's look at what Rashi says inside. He should have fallen backwards at source 11, since he had been struck on his forehead. The impact should have made him fall backwards. But in order that David should not be troubled, listen to this, to walk the extra distance, to cut off his head, for David now saved, oh, by the way, God says, you know what? I don't want you to walk an extra 20 feet to kill this guy's head. Let me make it a little easier for you. Instead of him going backwards, we're going to have David fall forwards so that you don't have to travel as far to cut off this guy's head that you just killed. And David saved walking his entire height. Thank you, God. But what do you think is the message here? Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says that God did this act of kindness, not because he needed to, but the way Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says beautifully, it's called in Hebrew, Ha'arat panav. You know, we say, by the way, when we bless children and grandchildren, you bless people, you say, Ya'er Hashem panav, that God's face should shine upon you. And this little gesture of Goliath not falling backwards, but falling this way, was God's way of doing this to David. Love you. I'm thinking about you. Not only did I help you slay Goliath, but I love you so much, I'm going to save you a few feet of walking, so he'll fall down this way. And that is not a miracle for the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was saved from Goliath, whether Goliath fell this way or that way. But it was a direct way for God to say to David HaMelech, I love you. I'm going to do something really kind for you here. It was a kiss from above, according to Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. And then you have another case in source number 12. It says there that God says to Avram Avinu, he gives him a major promise. After Lot had parted from, raise your eyes and look out from where you are. Look out from where you are. This is amazing. I've read this many times, but I never picked this up. To the north, south, east, and west. How many of you can turn your head around 360 degrees? Let me try. Now, I am not a chiropractor, but I don't know. How many of you can turn your head all the way around and see behind you? Anybody? But look at the text. Abraham doesn't move. Abraham doesn't move. And it says, raise your eyes and look all around. But how can he look behind? So look what the Or HaChaim says. The Or HaChaim says in source 13, God had to emphasize the word hamakom, from this place, to alert us to the miracle that he expanded Abraham's sense of vision so that he could see the entire land of Israel from the place he stood on. He did not even have to turn around to look in different directions. The promise that Israel would be for the nation of Israel, that's for the nation of Israel. But God says to Abraham, you don't have to turn your head. I'm going to let you look at the entire 360 without even having to turn your whole head around from this place. It's another kiss from above. I'm going to share with you two more because we're on a roll right now, and I can tell you guys are excited. You want to find out what other kisses did God give the Jewish people in history. You're going to leave tonight, and you're going to say, what did the rabbi talk about? You say, well, God kissed Abraham, God kissed David, right? We're going to talk right now in a moment about
Moshe.
Moshe. You know what, Phyllis? I didn't even get to Moshe. We're not doing Moshe tonight. But where did God give Moshe the kiss?
When he died.
Oh, now you're getting very holy on me. That's true. That is true. When he died, I wasn't even going into that, but there is, he gave him the shika. This is while he's living, we're talking. Let's get to the third one. The third one is in Shemot. Now, we all know the story. It's related to Moshe, actually, that Miriam and Yocheved, they send Moshe down the Nile, right? Who is the one who ends up nursing Moshe? Who nurses Moshe?
His mom.
His mom. Now look at the text. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take the child and nurse it for me. And then it says in there, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. So here it's telling us that Yocheved was blessed to be able to nurse her child that was going down the Nile. And yet the Midrash says, God says she got paid for it. Midrash says, what do you mean, paid for it? What does she need to get paid for when she's nursing her child? Of course, it's the greatest gift and honor that she's able to nurse her child. And again, the Midrash says over here, this is in source number 15, it says that God here is saying to her that not only am I going to save your child, but I'm going to let you know by giving you this extra wage that I'm going to take care of this child. It's another kiss from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God. And the final one, which is something that we do in benching, there's so many of these. If you look at source number 16, again, it's a very odd idea. You know, we have how many brachot in Birkat HaMazon? We have the first bracha 4. We have, if you look in 16, we have the bracha of Hazan and Hakol. We have the bracha of
Al-Haaretz, Al-Hamazon.
Al-Haaretz, right? We have the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim. Then if you look at the text, it says that the rabbis instituted on Israel and on your city, they instituted the last bracha of Hatov HaMeitiv, God who is good and does good. What was this for? So if you look, they instituted the blessing who is good and does good. It's source 16 at Yavne. In reference to the slain Jews of the city of Beitar at the culmination of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. They were ultimately brought to burial after a period during which Hadrian refused to permit their burial. As Rav Matna said, on the same day that the slain of Beitar were brought to burial, they instituted the blessing, who is good and does good. What does it mean? Why did they say this blessing? Thousands were killed. Thousands were murdered. But they gave this blessing, thanking God that the corpses did not decompose while awaiting burial, and thanking God they were ultimately brought to burial. Question is, what's the rationale for making that bracha? Millions, not millions, thousands of people were murdered. Again, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz explains that in the moment when it may have been possible for the Jewish people to lose their faith because of all the murder, God created a small miracle to let them know that he had not fully abandoned them. And that's the message you'll see in a moment that is the reason why, according to Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, that the miracle of the oil was so significant. You know, in a personal way, this may be odd if you see your source. What looks odd about source 18? Who can tell me what's source 18? Who can explain and decipher source 18 for me?
Where do you get the sources from?
Where did I get the sources from?
I can't see them.
Oh, the sources, I didn't put them up on the screen.
Oh.
The sources, actually, I'll just show you this source just to make it a little bit easier for a minute.
Thank you.
Because I like to see everybody's faces. But here's the sources. Source 18, this might be easier now. Okay, here's source 18. A Delta pilot waving from a plane. Why is that photo in my presentation tonight? I'm talking about kisses from above. So I'll tell you why it's there. As I'm sure everybody knows, my mom passed away in 1989 from a brain aneurysm. And my mother, of blessed memory, was buried in Israel. She's buried at a place called Eretz HaChaim, which is right near Beit Shemesh, in the hills outside of Yerushalayim. And at the time, we had a funeral for her in Atlanta. And my father, he should live and be well, decided he could only take one person with him. And the rest of the family, my mother's parents also, were going to stay back in Atlanta. So my father decided to take not me, but he took my another brother, I'm one of six, Ezra. And the halacha states that when does mourning begin? When you're not going to be at the burial. The burial is taking place in Israel. When does Shiva start? So the halacha is, it's called, and this happens, by the way, we say Shiva begins, the halachic terminology is called Stimat HaGolel. Stimat HaGolel, when the coffin is covered, that's when we believe the period of Shiva begins. But for somebody who's traveling to Israel and the family is not going with them, the halacha is the last time you see the person, the last time you see the coffin, or you have access to visualizing the person. So for us, that meant when my mother was on the plane, she flew from Atlanta to New York. It was a Delta flight. Delta's big in Atlanta. And the rabbi told us, his name was Rabbi Emmanuel Feldman, who was Atlanta. We were able to go all the way down. It was in the old days. But we went to the gate, and I still remember to this day, our hearts were broken. We all stood by the window and waited for the plane with my father on it, my brother, and my mother to taxi away. And I remember like it was yesterday, apparently the pilot on the plane knew that he was carrying my mother. He knew the story. And as he was pulling away, he gave me a wave. He waved to us. And for me, it was like literally in a moment of darkest sadness. Out of nowhere, I felt that, you know, God was watching over her. I mean, it literally, I mean, I still get chills. I tried to find out who the pilot was. I have no idea who the pilot is. And he probably took 5 seconds out of his life because somebody told him there's a family that's devastated because their mother just died. and he looked out and made a gesture towards us. And I'll never forget, for me, that was almost like a kiss from above, something that wasn't necessary, but let me know that my mother was in good hands and God was going to watch over her. And Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz uses this idea to help us understand why the miracle of the oil was so significant. And his point is, and this is, I think, what it's all about, the more unnecessary the provision that is provided, the more it shows of one's love. When something is done for somebody because they need it, it's one thing. But when somebody goes out of their way to do something for somebody, just as a gesture to say, you know what, I don't need to do this. You don't need it. But rather, I'm going to show you how much I love you. Then that becomes a true reflection and manifestation of God's love for the Jewish people. And Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, this is, you asked for it, so the sources are here. I know it's like basically hieroglyphics, but let me tell you what Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz says. He says that this becomes the essence of what the miracle of Hanukkah was all about. He says the miracle of the battle was something that had to be done for the state of the Jewish people in order to survive. That miracle is what he calls hechrechi, because the nation of Israel would not have survived if not for the fact that God saved them in that military battle. But it wasn't yet clear that God loved the Jewish people. He saved the Jewish people in the miracle of the battle. But it wasn't clear that he loved them and that he still had that love for them. And therefore, it's the miracle of the oil. And here it goes back to the question. It wasn't necessary. There are miracles all the time. They didn't have to use pure olive oil. They could have used impure olive oil. But God wanted to give them a kiss from above to say that I still not only want you to survive, but as he puts it, Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, it's ha'arat panim, it's God shining his face upon them and saying, I love you, I'm going to watch over you, and I'm always going to be with you. And that's why, by the way, it's interesting. Why is this miracle not quoted in the Al Hanisim? So Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz is something beautiful. You know, when we normally add a prayer for a holiday, what section of the Shemona Esrei is it normally in? It's normally in, right, Ritzeh. When we're praying for the Beit HaMikdash, we normally add Ya'ala v'Yavo. With Hanukkah, we don't have it in that section. It's not a reference to return to the temple, but it's in which bracha do we do Al Hanisim? Al Hanisim is in the Birchat Hodah, Hatov Shimcha, it's in Thanksgiving. What Chaim Shmulevitz says is that, you know, when it comes to giving thanks, it's sometimes the things that we actually are more essential that we take for granted. In other words, yeah, the miracle of the battle, God had to save us. Well, those are the things that we have to make sure that we remember the essential survival. Don't take those things for granted. That's why the miracle of the battle is in the Al Hanisim. But the holiday, God gave us this miracle of the Nes Shemen. That was really the great expression of God's love for the Jewish people. And this idea of the miracle of the oil being central as an expression of God's love is also something that I think is meant not only to awaken us to God's love, but also God saying to each and every one of us that he doesn't lose faith in us as well, and that we shouldn't lose faith in ourselves in terms of our ability to still stay connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to God. If you look at the text, one of the cases we see this with Yosef, where Yosef himself is also in danger of succumbing to the wife of Potiphar. According to the Ari, the struggle that Yosef had when he was in the midst of the darkness, he received that kiss on the way down, was in the house of Potiphar, was finding it within himself to know that God had not abandoned him. And if you look carefully at this text, it says regarding his withstanding the battle of the wife of Potiphar tried to tempt him. Again, it's very small, but it says, Vayhi kahayom hazeh. It was on that day he came into the house to do his work, none of the household being there inside. So this is fascinating. The word kahayom. Does anyone know what does that refer to? The word kehayom. It literally means on that day. But if you take those letters, what does that also spell? I'll make it a little bigger. Let's see if I can do this. I'm not so boom, boom. Wow. I know how to use that. Okay. So it says Chaf Hey Yom. What is that? Chaf Hey Yom.
25th.
The 25th.
Hanukkah.
Yeah. According to the certain writings, the test of Yosef and the wife of Potiphar took place on the first night of Hanukkah.
Wow.
That was a night when he was struggling with the darkness that was overwhelming him. But he found it within himself because he understood that God still was with him, that he found the neshama, the light that was within him, and he was able to push back against the darkness of Aisha Potiphar. And I recently saw a beautiful story that God oftentimes does send us signs so that we don't forget who we are, because God says he's always with us. This is a story from Rabbi Elimelech Biederman. It's story time. We have 9 minutes left, so stay tight. Here's a story just for you. The story is told of a Jew. By the way, in Rabbi Elimelech Biederman, the Jew is called a Yid, but for Stanford, I'll call it a Jew. I'll call you Yid. A story is told of a Jew from Israel who traveled to Australia 50 years ago. He didn't know the language and he didn't know if he could find Jews. He would have gone to the base medrash, but how do you find it when there was no one to ask? He's from Israel. He came up with a plan. On Friday afternoon, he went to a fish store and he waited. He figured Jews would come there to buy fish for Shabbos. And the plan was on target. A Jew came to the store to buy a large fish for Shabbos, and the Jew from Israel asked him whether he could be his guest for Shabbos. The man cordially agreed. It isn't every day that I have the opportunity to perform the mitzvah of achnasat orchim, welcoming guests. They spent a very pleasant Shabbos singing zmiros and speaking words of Torah together. On Saturday night, he said to his host, "Thank you for your hospitality. It was truly a wonderful Shabbos. You have a beautiful house. It's evident that God blessed you with wealth, but there's something I was wondering about. May I ask you about it?" "Go right ahead." "I noticed that in your showcase in your dining room, you have a broken olive oil bottle displayed there. Why do you save it?" The man replied, "The olive oil bottle is very precious to me. I am where I am today because of that bottle, and I'll tell you my story. My father died when I was young. I was the oldest child, so it became my obligation and responsibility to support my widowed mother and my younger siblings. Kind people had mercy on me, and they helped me get into the field of business. Thank God I had immediate success. There was always plenty of money in the home. But together with my financial growth came my spiritual decline. The first thing to go was my yarmulke, and soon afterwards the mitzvos left too. One afternoon, I saw a Jewish child sitting on the curb near my house crying. Being an orphan myself, it was always very painful for me to see a child crying. So I asked the child whether he wants to discuss what happened. The child said Hanukkah is approaching, and my father sent me to buy olive oil. He warned me to be cautious because we are poor and he'll be upset if the bottle breaks. I was cautious, but then a cat ran up to me, and startled, I fell and the bottle broke. He showed me the broken bottle lying in the gutter. And he said, how can I go to my father without the Hanukkah oil? I gave the child some money and said, go back to the store and buy 2 bottles of olive oil. Bring a bottle to your father and bring a bottle to me. I hadn't lit Hanukkah candles for several years, but this year I will. The host explained, when the child said, how can I go to my father without the Hanukkah oil? Something turned inside of me. I reminded myself of how my father would lovingly and joyously light the Hanukkah licht each year. I thought to myself, the day will eventually come when I will leave this world and I will meet with my father in heaven. How can I go to my father without my Hanukkah lights? How can I go to him without this mitzvah? I took the shards of the broken bottle from the gutter because something told me that this was a turning point in my life. That year I lit Hanukkah candles, and soon I was keeping Shabbos, then came Tefillin, and now Baruch Hashem, I have a beautiful family, all of us following the ways of Torah. This all began because of that broken olive oil bottle. Now you understand why I saved it all those years. And to me, it's a beautiful idea of what Hanukkah represents, is not only God kissing us from above, but a reminder to all of us, as we say in Yiddish, the pentaliyah that exists within each and every one of us. And just to bring this all home, the Slonim Rebbe explains that, the mitzvah of the Hanukkah oil, and this mitzvah is the last miracle. It was not easy. Once the Greeks were defeated by the Jews, they had sovereignty, but then they went into Galut. Then the Romans came and destroyed the temple. And the Jews, we've been living, certainly there have been good times, but we've been living in challenging times. And we're still in Galut and diaspora. And the Slonim Rebbe points out that this miracle of the oil, this kiss from above that took place, was meant to be a reminder to sustain the Jewish people and to sustain all of us. That yes, we may not yet have experienced the ultimate redemption, but God is saying to you, you're going into Galut. I want to send you a kiss. I want you every year to celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah as a reminder, because of the oil, that I've never abandoned you and that I'm always with you. And that's a very inspiring message. Just to conclude, we don't light, it's not called Or Hanukkah, it's called Ner Ish Ubeito. And the Slonim Rebbe says, on Shabbos, the idea behind the light on Shabbos is to transform a room that is dark into a room that is fully light. He says, Ner Shabbat is to transform darkness into light. That's not the message of Hanukkah. The message of Hanukkah means we may not yet be experiencing all the light and redemption in our lives, but that doesn't mean that with a candle, we can't eliminate some of the darkness. We can't be reminded that God is within the world, God has not abandoned us, and God is within each and every one of us. And in that way, I think particularly this year and in challenging times, this kiss from above of the Ner Hanukkah should be a constant loving reminder to all of us that God believes in us, that God has not abandoned us, and hopefully we'll experience wonderful expressions of God's love, not only then, but hopefully in all of our lives each and every day. So thanks for joining, and happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
A pleasure. Thanks for
Rabbi.
joining.
Yasher
Thank you,
Koach on
Rabbi Cohen.
concluding this
Thank
series
you.
for us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Get it off on a high note.
Have a great night.
You too.